So without further ado and seamlessly, I'm now going to invite Iain Drennan, the Executive Director of the WeProtect Global Alliance, to the stage, and Marija. I'm just going to say Marija because everybody knows you, Marija, because I'll get your surname wrong, and I just think that's rude. And Iain and Marija are going to talk about transforming the global response. Iain.
Morning, everyone. How do I follow that? Beeben is a huge hero of mine and has done such an incredible amount in this space. And I think, as she said, to enable children to have joyful, positive experiences online, which is what we're trying to achieve. It's not just about the removal of harm. It's about trying to create great experiences online. So I will do my best to try and follow that. But Marija and I will be doing something of a double act today to keep you on your toes. So we're going to do a brief introduction into what we both do quickly, and then we're going to repair to the seats and have a discussion and hopefully some time for Q&A to go into the issues a bit deeper. So I am the Executive Director of WeProtect Global Alliance, which is the largest and most diverse international network focusing on ending child sexual abuse online. So we have governments, we have industry, and that's not just tech, that's the financial sector, that's consultancy, that's thought leadership, also civil society, law enforcement, and intergovernmental organizations like UNICEF and Interpol. So I'm just going to set the baseline here in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the threat. A huge part of our role is to try and create a common information picture about what we're seeing as the problem on a global scale. So we're seeing it's growing. So we've got statistics here, both from NCMEC, the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, but also from the landmark Disrupting Harm study that Safe Online have supported in a number of countries around the world that Marija's going to talk about later, which shows 20% of children sexually exploited and abused online over the past year, and that was from 2022. Those rates are only going up, and we see that scale exploding really from the early 2000s when we heard yesterday that there's a feeling that we've kind of got this, under control. We don't anymore. This is growing at an exponential rate. So we're looking at how that growth is manifesting itself, and there's some key stats to pull out there. I want to just focus in on, first of all, the growth in non-English language terminology. So to emphasize, this is not a problem that's about America and Europe. We're seeing growth in Mandarin, we're seeing growth in Japanese, we're seeing growth in Arabic and Portuguese. This is a global problem. If you look at the demographics, if you look at where the biggest population of children are going to be, we need to be focusing on Africa. We need to be focusing on Latin America. We need to be focusing on Asia. This is not just a problem that we can handle within our own perimeter, our own national perimeter, our own regional perimeter. This is a global problem. And then secondly, 45 minutes. So that's the average time it takes to groom a child on a gaming platform. So that's average. What we saw in terms of the shortest time was 19 seconds. So 7 questions. That's how fast it can take. And that's a space that children, when we ask them, they see gaming platforms as safe. And that's an area where we've seen some leadership from the companies recognize that that there are child users and they need to protect them. But even with that, this is what we're seeing. And as Beben touched on just now, we're seeing this growth being connected to emerging technologies. And some of them, I would say, have emerged. So AI-generated CSAM, we're going to talk about that a bit later, but it opens up all kinds of questions, both in terms of how we respond, so that triage pathway becoming more complex, in terms of legislation. Globally, in many jurisdictions, artistic representations of child sexual abuse, AI-generated child sexual abuse material, it's not illegal. We've got a good legal framework within the UK, but that's not the case in many countries in the world. Extended reality, that intensity of experience. So we heard from colleagues in the breakout yesterday about, children are enjoying the experience of virtual reality, extended reality, but they feel scared sometimes. They feel disorientated. And if that's a place where exploitation is happening, haptic technologies, it is going to cause increased trauma. And we can't look at these in isolation either. So AI and extended reality, they're not going to be happening in separate spaces. They're going to be interacting. They're going to be interrelated. We've got to have this sophisticated idea of how we respond. And then lastly, sexualized legal content, which opens up all kinds of really challenging policy questions, where you're seeing the collection of sexualized content that doesn't meet the threshold for what's illegal, but yet is very much a risk factor, is where we have seen known predators or perpetrators collecting, curating material from social media. How do we respond to that? And that is very much a growth trend. But there is hope. There is hope. And I think it's very easy in this space to look away. It's just too horrible. And we in this room even, I think, sometimes feel that urge. And you can imagine, when I speak to people about what I do, quite often they say, how do you do it? How do you do it? Like, how can you go in day after day and work on this because it's just so horrible and I don't even want to think about it and I don't want to know? And I think the antidote to that, the remedy to that, is to say that we are responding. We are making progress. And I think to cherish that progress that we are making. So I think to pull out legislation and regulation in more countries, and not only at country level, but at state level. So I think, again, to name check Beben, she's done enormous work in terms of California state legislation, which matters tremendously because of so many companies being headquartered within that state. I think, if California were an independent state, it would be in the top 10, if not the top 5 of economies in the world. So the age-appropriate design code that's happening in California really matters. Tech innovations and safety by design. Safety by design 10 years ago was not a thing. People did not talk about it. We are talking about it now. Looking at safety technology, you can see in the exhibition hall just across the way, pulling out Yoti's work around age assurance. There are companies that have sprung up to provide and service these needs that we have. Awareness and education is increasing. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to look at NetMEC's No Escape Room interactive video around sexual extortion. For me, it plunged me back into the feeling that I had as a risk-taking adolescent. It was quite amazing in terms of the choices you make and what are the consequences of those choices. So more sophisticated ways of reaching people and talking to people in their own language. Also highlighting Presidio's work in Benin and in Ghana. Who are the influencers? Who's going to have cut through? Who is going to be able to resonate with children? And then finally, the impact of children and survivors themselves, who are speaking and talking and engaging and influencing the debate in a way that they haven't been before. And long may it continue and long may it grow. So we have 4 priorities ourselves over the next year. We need to be driving greater investment in prevention. We need to be having enforcement and disruption, but that's not what's going to end this thing. Simon has said it many, many times. We're not going to invest our way. We are going to invest our way. We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. We need child-centered interventions. At the moment, what we're seeing is there's a gulf between what children perceive as the risk when we speak to them and what we're actually seeing from the research. We need to close that gap. Thirdly, we need globally coordinated legislation and regulation. So if there's a patchwork of legislation, offenders are going to exploit that. They're already exploiting it in terms of AI-generated CSAM. You know, they are ingenious at seeing where the gaps are. We need to ensure that we're thinking ahead of that. And then finally, we are investing in a horizon scanning project in partnership with Thorn to ensure that we're trying to be proactive with this. We're not just reacting to the latest new shiny thing that tech companies throw onto the stage. We need to be thinking more strategically in terms of how is the internet developing on a grander scale? How is the digital world developing on a grander scale, and how do we respond to that? So we exist fundamentally to solve a problem. Our mission is to bring together experts to develop policies and solutions. We believe in the value of a broad tent. That doesn't mean we don't have tough conversations, but we do it in a way that is designed to reach solutions and to provide a space where all the different players can come together and generate next steps. And I think something that we all share within this room, and certainly within our alliance, is a digital world designed to protect children from sexual exploitation and abuse. Thank you, and I will pass over to Marija.
Thank you. Well, now I have an even harder task, which is to follow Biban and Iain. But we will treat you with a fireside chat because there was a fire alarm last night. So we will do a fireside chat afterwards. And you will have to bear with my non-native English accent and English. So I hope you will be patient with me. Anyways, I do always want to start my presentation with just a reminder of the figures and the scale of the issue. And again, you have heard that repeatedly from every speaker in the room over the last few days, but couple of days, but I really want to emphasize that we are seeing a growing issue. It is 1 in 6 children that carry the scars of online CSCA in our schools, in our rooms, in our homes, in everywhere where you look around in our communities. On digital platforms, there is 1 in 6 children that we know of, and this is only that we know of, who are carrying the scars of this huge, horrific problem. And this abuse casts long shadow. It is abuse that leaves lasting mental health consequences, health consequences. It influences your relationships. It creates diminished economic opportunities. It is something that truly tremendously impacts every victim and survivor of this type of abuse. What we have seen over the last few years of our work is we have started investing in research and data collection on the issue. And Disrupting Harm, as Iain mentioned, is one of our flagship research pieces that spreads across 13 countries in Southern and Eastern Africa and Southeast Asia. And what we have seen is that up to 20% of 12 to 17-year-olds fall prey to online CSCA. This is totaling to 5 million in 2021 alone, 5 million in these 13 countries. And this is only 12 to 17, and as GTA, Global Threat Assessment, and other research tells us, the growth in abuse happens in the age group of 7 to 10. So add that on, as well as the younger kids, the toddlers, the babies who are being abused, and we will never find out about that. So this is truly just the tip of an iceberg. And what we are hearing from these kids, and Disrupting Harm is truly a groundbreaking research because for the first time it's creating some prevalence estimates, and it's speaking to kids themselves. So this is 13,000 kids that we have spoken to across these 13 countries. It's a nationally representative sample. What they're telling us is that they don't disclose and they don't report. 95% of these kids never disclosed any negative experience with online CSCA to anybody. When they do, that it was usually peers, but they are ashamed, they're scared, and they're not aware of how and who can help them. And this is one of the biggest issues that we are facing across the board. The second thing that we know, which is maybe even more sad, but I don't know whether there's anything more sad than this, which is that those that do report wish that they never did, because they end up getting victimized, the support that they get is not sufficient. If we were hearing horrific stories of kids who have been traumatized by rescue operations and who say that what happened afterwards, after the rescue, was way worse than the actual abuse. And this is something to reflect upon as we think about where do we need to be as a global community when we are creating response and prevention efforts that are supposed to safeguard these kids and not further traumatize them. I will speak a little bit more about disrupting harm hopefully later, but we are really trying to make disrupting harm not stop at these 13 countries. Next year, we'll see the data from 12 additional countries across these 4 regions. And we are fundraising and trying to generate more resources for disrupting harm to really become a blueprint methodology for assessing online CSCA across nations and create roadmaps for national action. As Iain was saying, we are making progress. And I will call out, well, actually, I don't need to because Biban has spoken about UK. Iain has mentioned other types of forms of legislative and regulatory frameworks that have been adopted over the last couple of years. I will also mention that the US is trying to get on top of the AI with their executive order on AI. But again, seeing what has happened over the last, I keep on speaking about it this week, over the last couple of weeks with OpenAI and similar companies really doesn't give me much hope that this is creating any change and movement towards safety. But this is something to reflect upon in follow-up to this conference, I'm sure. But we are seeing good movement. I especially want to call out the lived experience experts, the survivors. I want to congratulate again Rhiannon, I don't know whether she's in the room, and Vicky for the award last night, but also truly how the survivor voices are shaping this agenda and how they're making us move it forward. It has been really tremendous progress in the last couple of years, especially last year alone. But having said that, challenges do remain, and I am a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic, even though I really want to celebrate the progress that we have made. But we are seeing a few things on our end, and I will not repeat what Biban and Iain said, but I'll try to add additive to that. First thing is that the cases are rising, including financial sexual extortion, but these rising cases emphasize truly big disparities in the global response and how unequal the distribution of the gains that we have made is. And why I say this is because our response to financial extortion cases or any other similar casings depends on equally shared capabilities and advances across the field. So for example, if US wants to address the rising caseload of all financial extortions, it needs to have equally equipped and capable partners in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, in the Philippines to be able to do that. We can't now start raising their capacities. We have to work proactively across the board, across the globe, to raise capabilities, capacities, access to technology to be able to address this issue. So far, the advances have not been equally distributed, and this is something that we really, really deeply worry about. That is why I would like to, maybe who from the room here is from UK or works in UK? Can you raise your hands? I would like to see maybe equal amount of hands next year, but many more hands from other regions of the world and diversifying the audience here, because it will be really great to share the expertise and leadership of UK in this area with other nations across the world that really need this type of support. AI-generated CSAM. You've heard a lot about this. We are seeing that this is really complicated law enforcement efforts. Currently, what we are hearing from, and this is the latest that I had from like 3 months ago when I spoke to Interpol, is that it is still in the stages where we can do something about this, but for how long we will have this window of opportunity to act is unclear. We are seeing that the people who are currently in the dark web producing AI-generated CSAM are maybe a handful, maybe a dozen, who are producing majority of CSAM. So thinking about what we can do right now to censor these models, to reach them, to find people who are doing this and proactively think about legislation and criminalizing possession of models and prompts, not only possession of AI-generated CSAM, will be critical for our ability to respond to this issue. The way that AI will shape this field is going to be tremendous for the ability of abusers to groom children, to access them, to create leverage in extortion cases will be tremendous. And I guess, again, we really, really are urging people to think about this now. Immersive environments, yesterday there was a great presentation about this from Elena Martellozzo and her team as well, and people are speaking a lot about the immersive environments and gaming platforms, but I don't think they're getting enough public attention as they should be in terms of how important piece of the ecosystem and puzzle they are in terms of grooming kids and getting them towards worse form of abuse. And then lastly, and not least, the rise of end-to-end encryption. I feel that, and I will show you the next slide that I hope you will think that it's AI generated, but it's not. This threatens our ability to do everything we are currently doing. This threatens to really destroy our ability to gain visibility to the cases that we currently have, especially in terms of reports from industry. And our debate so far has been end-to-end encryption is bad, or it's on the other side, it's good. There hasn't been much nuanced conversations around the risk profiles of the platforms that can or should be or shouldn't be adopting end-to-end encryption and how that looks like. And I think going deeper into the nuances will help us overcome some of the currently public unfavorable opinions when it comes to encryption that I think we should be addressing. So yesterday, somebody was speaking about how companies see access to their platforms as a right for kids. I think it was James Marsh who was mentioning that. How companies really believe it's a human right for everybody to have access to their platforms, right? But they're not alone. The highest UN human rights body, UN Commissioner, High Commissioner for Human Rights, this is their official account on Twitter. This is what they said in October 23, in the height of the debate around EU legislation. And then in October 22, end-to-end encrypted tools and services keep all of us safe from crime, surveillance, and other threats. Governments should promote their use rather than imposing client-side scanning and other measures undermining encryption. Learn more, full report. Highest UN human rights body. And this is a debate that we are losing because how do you fight against that? So we need to really think about where the frontier of the debate needs to be and how we can address this issue. And again, I wish that this was not true, but you can't make it up. It is. I just found it yesterday. So I'll switch the gears. Safe online. I want to be a little bit more positive because I believe in the mission that my team and I are trying to play in this ecosystem. Safe Online is currently the only global fund focused on child online protection. We have invested nearly $100 million in over 100 projects to fight online CSCA over the last 7 years. With huge gratitude to UK government as our only government donor, I must say that makes me really sad to say because no other government has matched their investment in the global response and prevention efforts at all. And they're the only ones who are currently supporting these collaborative funding mechanisms that we run. But we are not, briefly for those who know us, we are working across 3 investment pillars. We are strengthening the systems across the board. We work with governments and countries to enable their response and prevention services. We work to set up policies, legislation. We are supporting establishment of hotlines and helplines. Any service that you can imagine, we work with countries to support them with that. We invest heavily in research and data, as well as technology tools that we hope are and trying to be shareable, interoperable, and open source. But we are not only a funding vehicle. We are using our investments as one of our core levers to also create advancements across 2 additional areas of work. One is knowledge and evidence generation. We heavily invest in evaluations, but also learning opportunities for our grantees and the entire ecosystem to show what works and what doesn't work. When we fail, we'll share the failures. When we succeed, we share the successes. But it's really important to create this platform for discussion. And also supporting the whole ecosystem in terms of creating advocacy opportunities based on our learnings and the community. Our community is growing, and we are a very active donor. We actively manage the portfolio. And again, I'll ask you to raise the hands. Who here has been or is currently the grantee of Safe Online that is in the room? If you can raise your hands. Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you, and thank you for all of your work. With that, I'll just run quickly through key achievements over the last 7 years. So far, we have helped shape legal policies in over 70 countries and led to the design over 20 technology tools that are being used across 100 countries on regular basis. These tools have revolutionized our approach to prevention and response. We have funded CSAM classifiers, grooming classifiers. We have been working on investigative tools in end-to-end encrypted environments, P2P networks, and on the dark web. Your law enforcement agencies and hotlines and helplines are daily using the tools that we have supported. We have also bolstered national reporting systems in 46 countries, mainly thanks to IWF and our collaboration with them. We have established dedicated law enforcement units or supported their functioning in 11 countries, and this has resulted in identification of 3,200 perpetrators and the rescue of 1,533 children as of 2022. We are consolidating results for 23 as we speak. Our commitment continues, and I will not go through the detail of this year's focus, but I will just tell you that we continue to build on our core mission, which is investments. We are moving that towards really looking at the emerging technologies, but also innovative research into this field, as well as our collaboration with industry, where we are trying to make bridges between independent research and the way that we can influence policy and product design within industry. We have had really successful examples of this with a few of our grantees, and I can tell you more about that in follow-up. Why I'm here today mostly is to announce our new open call for funding. It is this year only 5 million because the funding ecosystem is shrinking. I can tell you that last week I had a conversation with one of the biggest foundations in this space who is sunsetting their child protection program because it's not urgent as they thought it was. I don't know how, but we are seeing that the landscape is changing and not for the good. However, with that grim note, we are really proud to announce the funding round, and our funding focus this year will be, because of the reduced envelope, will be only on innovation and potential for scale projects. We're going to be looking into the emerging technologies as well as different ways of delivery of key services and changes in the ecosystem. And we will be only funding or mostly focusing on funding projects that can really make the step change in the ecosystem's ability to collaborate and make the shift and make progress. So with that in mind, in a week or 2 weeks, the latest, you will see all the details of the project, of the open call, as well as application forms and details about the criteria for selection. And don't hesitate to get in touch with us because, I mean, you are the first audience that we have shared this information with. So I would be happy to speak to you about this in follow-up to this presentation and throughout the day. I do want to take us back, or not, yes, to call to action. Supporting what Iain had said, we really see a huge need for increased coordinated investment in this ecosystem. Last year, when we opened the call for 10 million, we have received a total request for 150 million in projects that were of solid quality. I'm not talking about projects that are like eligibility, not eligible for funding. 150 million was request, we had only 10 million. This year we have 5 million, the need is even greater. So thinking about investments, we need to push our governments, our partners, everybody to keep on investing in this field because it is essential. We need to drive the adoption of globally aligned legislation. The loopholes in legislation across the globe, as well as the loopholes in capacities and capabilities, are creating a response and creating it that much more difficult. Thinking about how we can move the needle in this sense will be critical. We have been advocating for this with G7, with EU, and other key forums of ASEAN and Latin America. And we can't forget the advancements in the African Union as well as in the African continent, because those are the next frontiers where this will be a big issue. And then lastly, safety by design. You had a keynote, so I will not repeat. I will just say everything that Biban said this morning. But that is going to be the main focus of all of our call to action over the next period. So with that, I will stop here, and we can move to the next segment. Thank you so much. So I think the mic is still on? Yes. So Iain and I thought we can do a bit of a Q&A between ourselves and give you a little bit more depth into what we were presenting this morning. So Iain, hello.
Hello, Marija.
I'm curious, you said a lot through your presentation. When you started, I saw 192 slides. I was like, it's not 192, it's the whole day, 192 slides, so that's good. What would you say was one of the biggest challenges that you feel that the Alliance is facing in tackling child sexual exploitation and abuse?
So for me, I think it's the risk that we end up with a two-tier response, because we know this is a global problem. That's a kind of cliche of this space. But I think what the reality is that you are getting children, for example, in countries in Africa where they're leapfrogging technology, they're sharing phones, but they're using the same platforms and services that we're seeing in Europe, in North America, but there's not the same wraparound in terms of education, in terms of support, in terms of law enforcement. in terms of support if people do report. And that, I think, that point you made about people having a worse time after they've been rescued, I mean, that's echoed in our research, speaking to survivors in a number of countries. You know, that victim blaming is real, and people not getting the response that they should have done. But then I think what brought it really home was sort of the opening talk yesterday. The UK, which is generally speaking seen as a leader in this space, you know, in that school, in that law enforcement response that we heard about, you know, it wasn't working the way we would have expected and hoped that it would. And if that's happening in the UK, you know, imagine what is happening in other countries who don't have the resources and the capacity. And I still think we have so much more to do to try and bridge that gap. I think, you know, Interpol are doing important work with their EXI database. We're seeing important exchanges in terms of knowledge and expertise, for example, on hotlines, but we're not doing enough. And I think the risk is we've got major populations of children who are just coming online and just discovering all these amazing opportunities online, but then they're going to be exposed full face with all the risks without the kind of mitigations that we need to have in place. So it's really that message. We need to be seeing this internationally. It's no longer sufficient to kind of think about, you know, our national perimeter and we can keep this country safe. It just doesn't work like that in a networked age.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we constantly think about is the connectivity efforts across the globe, right? Currently 2 billion kids are online, but an additional billion will come online over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's going to be mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia and Southern Asia. So when we think about the global response, we need to be thinking about what is happening in these regions, not only where we are currently and the kids that are currently connected. So thank you, Iain, for that. Maybe just to add a couple of additional challenges on my end.
No, go ahead.
I think what I really want to emphasize, and I think this speaks to Peer and your work as well, Simon, and your team, is that when we started funding 7 years ago, we found ourselves blind in terms of we had no data about where we should be investing, what are the pathways to funding, to victimization, what is happening outside of the few countries that we work in and know about. And it was really hard to, as a global funder, think about how do we actually measure the change that we are making? How do we know that we are making good investments? How do we know that we are making the good bets in the right places? And that was really, really hard. So that's how Disrupting Harm came to be, but also other pieces of research and evidence that we have been investing in, including our Technology Coalition Research Fund, as well as the Data for Change community. And I would, again, invite you to speak to me afterwards if you're interested to join this community, which is basically focused on understanding how we can create some data governance systems in the online CSCA data ecosystem. Because currently a lot of data holders in this ecosystem consider the data their organizational asset, but don't think about it as an opportunity for sharing and improving our operational capacities, response capacities, as well as learning opportunities. So I think in that sense, it's really important to build this understand where the barriers are to sharing, but also seek how to dismantle those barriers where they're perceived, or work on those that are truly there to work around them. So this community is really evolving, and we're really hoping. We're doing this again together with WeProtect Global Alliance and other partners. So we would be happy to involve you in this work if you're interested. But data gaps are really critical, I think, challenge in this ecosystem as well. Yeah, then it's me again.
It is. you just carry. I didn't want to stop you.
I just take charge of things.
Oh no.
So I think what we are also seeing is that throughout work, the rise in financial extortion has been really put on the top of people's agenda over the last couple of years. And I am really curious, Iain, if you can tell us a little bit more about what is Alliance seeing, what are your members doing when it comes to this?
Yeah, and financially motivated sexual extortion or sextortion is something we've seen explode over the past few years. You know, so on the slide, it's an enormous increase, and it's a different phenomenon for a number of reasons. So first of all, it's targeting adolescent boys, which is is not the most usual cohort we see, where victims tend to be more female. So that's different. Secondly, we're seeing a financial motivation coming in. So I think the overwhelming majority of offenders in this case are motivated by sexual gratification, but in this case, what we're seeing is organized crime groups who are moving into this almost as a commodity. So they are seeing something that they can monetize, something they can add to their portfolio, but they are going at it incredibly aggressively. So we are seeing, shockingly, from first contact to tragically someone taking their own life, that's happening in a matter of hours. So we're seeing this relentless pressure for money, relentless pressure, and then, in many cases they give the money and the images, the material goes up anyway. And children are just feeling absolutely trapped and that they've nowhere to go, and just very severe consequences to it. We're seeing it happening globally, so it's coming out of countries like Cote d'Ivoire, like Nigeria, like Philippines, and that necessitates sophisticated international collaboration and collaboration with tech platforms as well. And I think if we're looking for positive stories, speaking to colleagues in the FBI, this is the thing where they're saying that actually they are getting good collaboration with the likes of Meta. And I think that's important to recognize that in these areas there are areas where things are working. We're going to be doing a webinar very soon where we're going to have the Nigerian police, we're going to have Meta, we're going to have NECMEC, and I think looking at how this works on a global level to really address this crime. But I think it's really looking at how the crime type is developing, is modifying, and new forms of abuse are coming in that we need to respond to. And I think final point, AI is going to be playing a huge element. It already is. We're seeing that in terms of simultaneous translation, so people being targeted in Germany in their native language from Nigeria. So they're just using simultaneous translation. But AI-generated CSAM, they will be exploiting all the tools at their disposal. But I mean, I suppose on that positive note, Marija, you're working with grantees. I've had the privilege of being on the steering committee for Safe Online for a number of years, and it's been wonderful seeing these grants go out and the work coming through. Give me some examples of some of the most inspiring things you've seen during your time as a key funder in this space.
How much time do we have? I really want to say that the most inspiring funding that we have given and the projects we have funded have been the riskiest ones. Like whenever we were like, this is crazy, this will never work, and we funded it, it actually worked. And I think that's, again, I'm looking at Nina is smiling. That was one of the projects we funded was like, this is so risky, why would we ever do this? And then we funded it, it was amazing. So I would say Protect Children Finland and their first survey, redirection survey, and that work was really, truly something that we are really proud of. And again, congratulations on the award. I will single out a couple of projects that I think are really making a big step change. And this is when we think about the future funding, this is where we want to be. One of them is the global it's Universal Classification Schema, the project run by InHope as part of the Global Standard Project. And why I think this project has really huge potential is because it is introducing this ability to create a language that can speak between jurisdictions when it comes to classifying child abuse material. And Universal Classification Schema was published in March 23. And it was a really result of such an amazing collaboration effort across jurisdictions, across partners, across sectors, where they sat for a year or more and worked really hard to define agreed upon, vetted set of labels for child sexual abuse material that aligns with legal definitions of CSAM across multiple jurisdictions. Once that schema was created, you can start labeling CSAM, an in-hope network of hotlines. He started doing that this year, and by the end of the year, they're hoping that they will have the first data set of all the child abuse material that is labeled across using the schema that has all the potential combinations of the labels, which will then be used as a foundational resource for all the hotlines to be able to translate between jurisdictions. And as a cherry on the top, this will be automated. So once the data set is replenished and we can start learning the machine learning model to learn how this classification works, it will be able to translate silently between jurisdictions any CSAM piece of CSAM and tell you in which jurisdiction this is illegal and by what definitions. What this work also enables you is to also add different labels. So far it's focusing on nudity, sexual activity, and demographics, so like basic criteria, but then each of the analysts, whoever reviews this, can add certain labels so that law enforcement can use these in investigations, hotlines can use this for takedown and notice, all these kinds of things. And I think this project really brings a step change in how we as an ecosystem work, and it's something that is becoming a connecting tissue rather than an individual project. I think one of the biggest groupies of this project is Cajal, who is over there. And if you want to learn more about Global Standard Project, he has been working with law enforcement to label an enormous amount of material as per the schema. So please talk to him or me if you want to learn more about that project. And the second one that I really want to single out very fast is a project that is called DevOps. It works with Interpol. And the best way to describe this project is that it's sometimes difficult to justify why we fund it because it's basically just a bunch of nerds coming together a few times a year to work on the most amazing tools that law enforcement and other partners are using across the ecosystem. So if anybody has heard about the school uniform database, that was started at DevOps. If you're using as a law enforcement connect the dots, again, that was started at DevOps. A lot of the projects that you're hearing about now, or they're pushing the boundaries of the response, have been started and developed at DevOps and then scaled or adopted by either private companies or law enforcement agencies. Funding collaborations is critical. Not only things and tools and projects, funding places where people connect, like this one, is the most critical thing you can do in this ecosystem. And I think finding more ways and money to do that will be critical going forward. But the riskier, the better. With that, Iain, I would like to hear from you maybe a little bit more about something that DevOps has actually recently been working on, which is tools to tackle generative AI. And I know that, again, we've spoken a lot about this, but if there's anything else that you want to say based from the Alliance's perspective on how is this ecosystem influencing your members, the debates, potentially maybe more industry?
Yeah, I mean, AI is definitely the next shiny thing that the community is focusing on. And I think whenever we ask our members about what they want to talk more about, what they want to focus on, generative AI always comes up. And it's an issue that sort of seems to have come out of nowhere, but actually it's the product of long development and long discussion and debate behind the scenes. And I think, ChatGPT exploding was sort of the tip of the iceberg of a huge amount of work. And I think for us as a community, we need to be investing in identifying how that's going to manifest. So I think we're working with Thorn and with academics on looking at how the internet is going to be changing, how this is going to be influencing our sector, and what we need to do in response. But I think there's some really good guidelines out there already. Again, name-checking Thorn. They've done some excellent work in terms of all stages of the development process, what checks and balances should be in place to deliver effective safety by design on the generative AI space. What is the training data that is being used? How is that being safeguarded? What are the watermarks that are being used to enable people to identify that something is AI generated? I think I always keep coming back to a quote from my favorite film, Jurassic Park, where the scientist played by Jeff Goldblum, because your scientists were so preoccupied by thinking whether they could, they never stopped to think whether they should. And I think that goes back to Biban's point about, linking together, big companies, they're not monoliths. There are different voices within those companies, and one of the voices there is the trust and safety voice, which I think is probably very much aligned with many of the views in this room, but they are not necessarily a dominant voice. And we need to ensure that that voice is playing a role and is playing an influence on the engineers and the developers who, it's not malign. They're focusing on developing, cool products and products people will love to use. But we need to ensure that that potential for misuse, that potential for exploitation is factored in. And I think we need to be doing more work to ensure that that's built into the process and not just a nice to have. But just, I think to build on that, sort of looking at sort of the funding in this space and sort of where we're at, because I think ultimately this relies on resources, and sort of as the preeminent funding body in this space, what are your perspectives on where we need to go and what we need to prioritize further?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big question. It's a huge area that we are not even understanding, I think, in the present moment. So as you've seen in our funding round, we're really going to be focusing on both calling for proposals on research on Gen AI, not only from the perspective of how it's impacting online CSCA per se, but like how are kids experiencing generative AI? We don't know much about how kids are using this for education, interactions. What are they creating? What are they doing? How do they feel about it? We really know nothing in the present moment, and I think learning more about those things will help us also define responses and maybe put pressure on tech companies to do more, even though, again, I am very pessimistic when it comes to Gen AI companies at the present moment. But we will be funding that. We will be funding tech tools. But I also want to say not only tech tools to help us identify what is Gen AI, what it's not, how to improve maybe classifiers for generative AI, CSAM, or AIGA as we call it, but also how can we use potentially Gen AI for the good. And there are some examples. Yesterday we were hearing examples around how the grooming classifiers and detection will largely now depend and should probably on large language models. We have been seeing, especially as part of DevOps, but then now trying to invest in a project that is going to be using Gen AI to help us, for example, law enforcement officers describe CSAM they're seeing, so analysts don't have to actually go and spend so much time thinking and processing in their brains what they're actually going to write down, which is going to help a lot with the well-being aspect of law enforcement officers. But think about what are the other opportunities for us if it's already there, the capability is there. How can we actually use it to advance our response and prevention efforts will be, I think, critical for the way forward. And I think the last thing is that we will also need to invest heavily into pressure to make sure that, again, we know where this is heading. We don't have luxury this time around to say we don't know what this can lead to. We exactly know where this can lead to. And now with companies announcing they're going to be allowing making porn or pornographic text or video or audio content, I think this is going to be the next frontier we will not be able to address if we don't act right now. So I think those are kind of like the main things that we are looking into. But I'm wondering, we have more questions for each other, but should we stop here and maybe see if there's any questions from the audience?
That's what I was thinking.
If they're not, then we can. Yep.
So I'm a first year cybersecurity PhD student at Royal Holloway, and my research interest is looking at the metaverse and immersive technology platform. And I wanted to ask if you guys looked into digital identity in immersive tech and age assurance methods.
Do you want to take it in? Or?
So you couldn't repeat the last, so I didn't quite catch the last.
Oh yeah, so I wanted to ask if you guys were looking into digital identity in immersive technology platforms and age assurance.
So I think it's, sort of understanding who's there, I think is incredibly important, but also incredibly challenging. So we're looking at a project actually with SIPL, which is a think and do tank focused on privacy around age assurance. And look, because I think it's not a one size fits all process, and I think also you don't want to be necessarily excluding people from potentially positive experiences if you're demanding particular, government issued forms of ID, because you're getting into issues where you're not giving people access that they should have. So I think there are also really creative solutions around age estimation, sort of Yoti being a sort of forerunner in that. But I think, it's sort of matching that with the platform. So an example I heard yesterday about, the reporting and how reporting is challenging in immersive environments, because the sort of someone's name badge is at a particular part on their avatar, and someone has to literally chase someone around the room in the virtual space so they can report. And if it's that's not what you want. So I think it's something that should be built in from the get-go. To red team that, to work out, and then what are the implications of that identity? What are the requirements of the platform? And doing a proper risk assessment based on that. But Marija, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to center these answers to these questions and these debates around children themselves. Like, what are they experiencing? With the caveat that, as we heard from Biban, kids can't really assess risk at certain age or in certain environments. So we need to think about those things as we let them access these environments. But once we do, I think, again, what we're hearing from them, they don't want to be disconnected from their friends. They don't want to be disconnected from experiences. But it will be responsibility of us and governments to find age-appropriate ways to deal with that. To be honest, we haven't funded a lot of research in this area, and we would love to potentially talk to you and discuss this further, because I think it is the next frontier that we, again, know very little about, because it is not yet as spread because of just the difficulty of, like, the headsets are expensive, not many people have them, requires speed internet and so on, but these barriers will be reduced very fast, and we need to be ready for those. So we're really happy to talk about that more. There is there. We have 6 minutes left.
Hi there, Maggie Maybe at Marsh Law, and I'm wondering if you've seen any funding opportunities that come sort of redistributing the funds that we know tech has in a way that actually helps the system, right? Regulation that gives the fines that are imposed the money back to groups like this, or, we're civil litigators. When you sue them, they pay the victims, right? Are there kinds of funding opportunities that you've seen which sort of redistribute the wealth? We have not. That's the short answer to this. We are working with, we have been working with Technology Coalition, which is the coalition of the main tech companies, but they don't have huge amount of funding. They're basically just an association that gets membership-based funding. And we have worked on a research collaboration with them, so we're trying to bring independent research to influence their products and product design, and I think that's the most productive collaboration we have seen so far. It's thorny, it's hard, we have made many mistakes, but we are learning from it. So I'm just saying, like, it's not all peachy and perfect, but we are learning from that collaboration on day-to-day basis. There is an issue, especially for us as a fund, with our governance, has been always, can we receive the funding from tech? And what would that look like? Would that diminish our ability to be vocal about other things and issues? I don't think so if the right ethical frameworks are established around it, and if we can find productive ways of doing that. But we haven't yet figured out the way around that. The third thing I will say, to be honest, I don't know what's industry's appetite to give us money. There may not be any. And then in that sense, I think that the money that industry is giving, we don't have transparent view into who they're giving money and for what purposes. What I've heard so far, and this is like, don't hold me for this, is that the money has gone to specific trainings of law enforcement units to use specific tools that they are putting in terms of reporting or cyber tips or so on. So it hasn't been really like a whole system approach of supporting like efforts like that. And they would do a lot of public campaigning, but not more than that I know of. There was a question there.
Sorry, can I take chair's privilege?
Yes.
Because there's a question which I probably think I can answer. So I'll answer that question, but then I'll come with I'll use my privilege. So the question online is, how well prepared are police forces to identify AI-generated CSAM versus real-life CSAM, and how will this impact safeguarding of potential victims? The answer is that the generative CSAM is now getting so very, very good, it's becoming nigh on impossible to differentiate between the artificial versus, and I hate using this word, real, but that's probably the easiest way of describing it. And it's going to impact our ability to focus upon safeguarding and rescuing real victims, and I use that word carefully, versus wasting time trying to identify a generated victim, albeit we all recognise that there will be elements of a donor image in there. So I hope that answers that question. Can I please ask a question for the two of you as people that are operating in the global ecosystem? I will give you a perception. I'll just be interested in your views. We are facing a global epidemic, and there is a huge amount of money being invested globally to tackle the threat, but the global ecosystem is simply dysfunctional. How do we tackle that problem? Because I believe it is undermining our ability to make a real difference, because there are too many competing agenda, too many people duplicating work and effort, and actually we are undermining our capability and our capacity to make a real difference. So I guess the first question is that a fair summary? And if you accept the summary, what's the solution?
So I'll have a go. So I think it's a fair summary, but I think things are better than they were. So I think if we look at 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when my organization was first set up, I think the silos were even deeper and even more chronic than they are now. I think there is a tendency within the system to focus in on silos, because I think it's a natural consequence of the relationships that are already there. Law enforcement will talk to law enforcement, tech will talk to tech, government will talk to government, and in many cases, there's so limited capacity, all you can do is to be reactive and focus on putting one step ahead of you in terms of what you're just trying to get to the end of the day. And so consultation and all the necessary things to do to find out what else is happening in the space is very challenging. And I think part of the reason we exist is to try and draw those dots and be a support and a resource to our members to try and minimize that. But I think you're right. It's a very competitive funding space. I think the one thing I would dispute strongly is that there's a lot of funding out there. I don't think, if we compare it with other issues, I don't think there is. And certainly the funding that's going in, nothing like enough is going into the preventative upstream measures that need to, a long time ago, in a past life working on counterterrorism, the decision was that, we need to be going upstream. We need to be dealing with the root causes. That's not really happening here. That's not to in any way diminish the need to identify the material, take it down. That needs to be happening. But in a proportional way, we need to be spending far more on prevention and the root causes and the drivers of this. And that's what we need to be doing as a community. So to carve out that space and advocate for ministers, for CEOs to prioritize this as business as usual, not just a bolt-on, but something we need to engage with. Marija.
The time is up, but I will say just a couple of things. One is that I agree with you, Simon. Not that there is a lot of money, because the money there really isn't, but that my feel is that we are a really unforgiving community. And bear with me, we are really rigorous. Like, we're so child protection community in this space, we want to be the most technically sound people. We know our thing, and we are not as open as we should be, I think, to bringing new people in. And I think that sense of we are close community, we know each other, we collaborate between each other, we know the vendors we work with, we know the people we work with, it's all about personal connections, ends up being this service to us. In many ways, it's great for certain ways, for certain things. For certain things, it's really not good, because it's really hard to bring people in, because we then tend to unintentionally sometimes even not shame them, but make them feel uncomfortable because, oh, you don't know, like, oh, we've done that, like, oh, we've tried that 30 years ago, didn't work. Like, things are changing and we can make them different, and I think we need to be a little bit more open to hearing people from other ecosystems. And I will say there is this scarcity mindset in this community. We believe that there is like finite things to do. There is infinite things to do in the ecosystem, and the more people can come in, the more we can navigate and let people freestyle and improvise and see how things can work, the more we will be able to do stuff. And what I've learned from the climate movement, and I think this was one of the most important lessons when we were like drawing the similarities between how can we get where the climate movement is now, or even though they believe still that they're like far off from being a movement, is that one of the people who formed the biggest push for funding in the climate movement said, drink and the money will come. We need to start behaving as if there is funding and start being much more bold and much more risk-taking in how we do things, because there will be more if we are proving that we are taking more risks and we are taking more action. So I think in that sense, alignment will come, things will happen, but we just need to start thinking a little bit more open, a little bit more collaboratively, I think.
Marija, Iain, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. It's now coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you.